I don't like this at all. Daddy, I don't like this one bit, said my hair in a ponytail 9-year-old with angry eyebrows and fists clenched like she's getting ready to throw some hands. I don't like it, she said. I don't like that when you make breakfast, you always make breakfast first for Nora and Lola, and then you make Mike breakfast, and I don't like that one bit. Several weeks ago, I was making breakfast for my kids like I do most mornings before I go to work, and my 9-year-old just dropped suddenly between me and the eggs I was trying to scramble for them, and she started to accuse me of age discrimination in my own house. This is a true story. She's like, it's because I'm the oldest, isn't it? Right? That's why you make my breakfast last. You make my breakfast last because I am the oldest, she said with such exuberant emotion. Because she's so dramatic. Just like her mama, all right? Sorry, babe. If you can't say amen, say ouch. Just speaking the truth here. She's like, it's because I'm the oldest. Right? That's why you make my breakfast last. You always make their, blueberry waffles, and then you make my apple cinnamon waffles, and you make me eat last, and I don't like it because it makes me sad, and she's just going on and on and on, and I let her talk, right? I don't know how any of the other dads in the room would have responded, but I let her finish her whole protest, because I'm a good father, right? It's who I am. It's who I am. And so I let her finish, and then I got close to her because she's like, Mommy doesn't do that, blah, blah. And so I was like, I let her finish, and I kind of went down to her level, and I'm like, look at me. Look at me now. I'm the captain now, okay? I'm like, I need you. Just kidding. I didn't say that. I said, look at me. I said, do I look like I care how this makes you feel? I'm just kidding. I didn't say that. That would be, you guys are like, whoa, bro. That's a joke. I didn't say that. That would be really mean if I said that. Plus, my wife would karate chop me in the throat if I talk to her kids. You're laughing. She has a black belt in Taekwondo, so don't let the pretty face fool you. She will take me out if she needs to, and I'm a little bit scared, right? And yes, it is true that every time I make breakfast, I always serve her food last. But as I tried to explain to her that morning and every morning that she protests in our house, I explained to her that the reason I make her breakfast last and serve her last is not because she's the oldest. No, the reason I serve her last is because I'm trying to use the waffles as a metaphor to teach her something at a young age that I'm still learning at a later age. Right? The reason I serve her last is because I want her to start learning at an early age that there's so much joy and freedom and greatness for those who eat last. Several years ago, a guy named Simon Sinek wrote a book called Leaders Eat Last. And in his book, he argues that the one thing great leaders have in common is self-sacrifice for the service of others. Right? The whole argument in the book is him just saying, hey, if you look, it doesn't matter where you look. You can look at a Fortune 500 company or a mom and pop shop or a church or a team, a sports team. You can look in a home, in a small office. Doesn't matter where you go. If you see a great leader, the one thing they all have in common is they all eat last, i.e. they all choose to self-sacrifice in service of others. SC fam in the room, and those of you who are watching online, I would love to propose for you this morning that there is so much joy and so much freedom and way more greatness to be found in eating last than you and I have ever dared to imagine. Do you guys remember the first time you went to Mr. Freeze? Anybody remember? If you're watching online, Toledo, Mr. Freeze is most popular ice cream place in Toledo. Is that fair? Yeah? Maybe. I think it's a little overrated, but that's a different conversation, right? Don't throw stuff at me. I know Mr. Freeze is Sacred Hill here in Toledo, Ohio. But I remember the first time I went to Mr. Freeze, and you go and you've never been before and nobody warned you and you're trying to practice self-control. And I'm like, I'll get a small, I'm like, can I get a small? Right, and then the girl, behind the little window that looks like she just got her driver's license yesterday, she's like, here you go, honey. And I'm like, first of all, you're not old enough to call me honey, okay? Like, can we just like, does that bother anybody else when people that are like 15 are like, I'm like, you can't call me that. But second of all, I don't think you got my order right. Like, I wanted a small. And they're like, no, like, that is a small. I'm like, what do you mean that is a small? That looks like an extra large, right? The small at Mr. Freeze was a lot. And they're like, if you want the small size, you got to order the baby, okay? Which is embarrassing. So now every time I go to Mr. Freeze, I'm a grown man. I'm like, can I have the baby cone, please? You know, right? Because there is more. I know that this is going to sound like the craziest preacher talk, whatever in the world. But what if it's true? What if there is more joy and more freedom and more greatness for those who eat last? What if the reward for self-sacrifice for the sake of others is actually more joy than you and I ever bargained for? And that's the good news in today's conversation. Right? The good news is that I promise you that the life you and I have always been looking for is at the end of self-sacrifice, contrary to how we feel. The bad news is it's going to take us a while to get there. The bad news is the hard stuff comes before the good stuff. If you are just joining us, we've been kind of journeying through the book of Philippians. Someone asked me earlier, how long are we going to be in Philippians? I'm like, I don't know. We'll see what God does. We're in Philippians, and Philippians was a book that was written by a guy named Paul, and I always like to throw this out there in case there are people in the room who are maybe watching online who are like, I'm not even sure if I believe any of this God stuff. If that is you, man, you would like Paul, because for most of his life, Paul was anti-Jesus, and then he met Jesus, and Jesus changed his life. And then he wrote letters to these churches that he planted. And one of the letters he wrote is the book of Philippians. And we're in chapter 2 today. And so just peep this with me if you have a Bible. If not, the words are going to be up on the screen. Philippians chapter 2, we're going to start in verse 1. Paul's writing. And Paul says this, therefore, he says, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in his spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then he says, I want you to make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of mind. I'm going to read verse 1 again. Therefore, he says, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, any comfort from his love, any common sharing in his spirit, any tenderness, and any compassion. Quick story to maybe put this verse into perspective for you. A couple months ago, I flew to Atlanta with some of our team and some people in our church, and we flew Delta, not Spirit, because we're saved. I'm a little bougie, you know, just a little bit. And so we got on the flight, and I flew. Aaron was with us, and as soon as we got on the flight, we noticed like half the flight was like empty. And as soon as we saw that, Aaron did his thing. He went up to the stewardess and started this whole sob story about how he has the longest legs in the world, and it's really uncomfortable whenever he travels, and yada, yada, yada. Can we sit in the exit seat because the exit row is empty? And she said yes. And so Aaron and I are like, dude, this is awesome. And so we go in the exit row. Aaron's by the window. I'm in the aisle. I know he wanted me to sit next to him, but I'm like, bro, we're going to spend the next 3 days together. I just need a little bit of space, right? And so we're sitting there. And if you've ever flown and been in the exit row, you know what happens, right? Before you take off, the stewardess comes and they ask you questions, right? They're like, do you speak English? You're like, yes. Okay, that's a great start, you know? They're like, are you willing to help people if it's needed? And you say yes. And they're like, will you follow crew instructions? And you say yes. And they ask you all of these questions that they ask anybody that sits in the exit aisle. Now, Aaron, I don't know if you do you know why they were asking you these questions, by the way? Why? You have no idea. Okay, that's what I thought. You have no guesses at all? You're just like, whatever. I'm just going to say yeah. Exactly. That's the word, right? The reason, I don't know if you ever thought about it this way, that the stewardesses ask you those questions all the time is because they know that for most people, when you're sitting there, right, all you're thinking about is the leg room that you have now. You're like, this is going to be a great flight. You're doing stretches. And they want to make sure that you understand that you sitting in that seat is far less about your leg room and far more about being able to help people. Right? The reason they go through that speech that they go through every time is because they're trying to get you to understand what the great theologian Uncle Ben was trying to get Peter to understand, right? With great leg room comes great responsibility. The reason they're going through that speech, Aaron, is because they want you to know, and they're trying to remind you, some of you like that a little bit too much. They're trying to remind us that the exit row was not designed ultimately because there are people like Aaron and Jared with super long legs, and they're really uncomfortable on flights, and they're like, hey, let's create a couple rows for these giants so they can have a good flight. That's not why the exit row was created. No, the exit row was created so that there would be more space in case people need help. Are you with me? That's what Paul is doing in this passage. Right? I don't know if you've connected the dots yet, but what Paul is doing here is he is reminding us the same way that the airline stewardess reminds us that our seat has a far greater purpose than our personal pleasure. Right? What Paul is trying to get you to see here is that if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, everything that God did for you, he didn't ultimately do for you just so you can have everything he gave you. He gave it to you so you can have it, and also so you can then pour it out to other people. Do you guys see that? Let me show it to you again. He says, if you have any encouragement, I'm not going to ask for hands, but if you're sitting here going, yeah, I feel like I've been encouraged by my unity with Christ, Paul's like, I'm talking to you. If you have any comfort from his love, if any sharing in his spirit, if any tenderness, if any compassion, what Paul is saying here, don't miss this, is that if you have any of those things, the reason God gave you compassion and tenderness and comfort and encouragement is not just so you can have compassion and tenderness and encouragement. No, God did that because he wanted you from that place to be able to serve others. So let me read that verse to you again. Thank you, Robin. I'll take one. I'm going to read it to you again, knowing that's what he's talking about. And this time I'm going to read it. Eugene Peterson has an amazing paraphrase of this. I'm going to read it from there. And just, I don't know, a little pro tip. You may want to chew before you swallow or you're going to choke. This is like a big old T-bone steak that he's about to drop on your tray, okay? So make sure you just take your time. Listen to how Eugene Peterson paraphrases this. He says, if you've gotten anything out of following Christ, if you're here and you're not a Christ follower, you can just take a pass, right? You know, just lean back in the exit row and be like, I'm just going to get my popcorn and watch you guys. Listen to what he says. If his love has made a difference in your life, anybody? Yeah. If being in the community of the Spirit means anything to you, if you have a heart, if you care, do me a solid, he says. Agree with each other. Love each other. Be deep-spirited friends. Gets worse. Don't push your way to the front. Don't sweet-talk your way to the top.
Let's go, Robin.
You used to be my favorite person, David, but now I think Robin, she may have just taken the championship belt from you, David. You got catching up to do. I'm just going to move my table over here. No, just kidding. No, listen, this is amazing. Don't sweet-talk your way to the top. Put yourself aside. Help others get ahead. Don't be obsessed with getting your own advantage. Forget yourself long enough to lend a helping hand. Woo! Now, I don't know what you think of when you hear that. Like, I'm not sure what you're picturing. But just so we're in the same zip code, because I don't want you to get off prematurely on the wrong exit, just so we are in the same place, I just want to share with you briefly what Paul is not saying here. Okay, I want to share 3 things that Philippians 2:3-4 is not. Okay, number 1, are you ready for this? This is not about common courtesy or being nice. Okay, in other words, when Paul wrote these words, his outcome that he was hoping for was not that his words would inspire the church in Philippi to be nicer people. Okay, because sometimes I think we read scripture and we're like, oh, you know, Paul just wants it to be like nice. That's not what he's saying. Okay, you know what I mean by nice people, right? You know, the kind of people that help the old lady across the street, you know, your neighbor forgets their trash can and you help them pull it up into their driveway. You know what I'm talking about? Like you hold the door from somebody. Anybody done this lately? I was at Chipotle last week and I was leaving and there's a guy come in and like I held the door open for him. And he wasn't like one of those like his clothes, like he was still at his car and I held his door open for, he had to do the fast walk thing. You know what I'm talking about? You know when someone opens the door and you're so far away and you don't want to be rude, and so he's doing like that, and I just like, this is amazing, right? Look at me, right? And like I let the door open, he made it like 2 miles, and he's like, man, thank you, you know? Doesn't that feel good? Is that just me? Anybody like this? It feels good, right? Don't it feel good when someone's trying to get in the elevator and you put your fingers in there, it's about to crush your fingers, and then it opens, and they're like, woo, thank you. And you channel your inner Chick-fil-A, and you're like, my pleasure. You're like, yeah. No doubt the world would be a better place if Christians were half as nice as the Chick-fil-A attendants were. But make no mistake about it. What Paul is calling for here is so much bigger than courtesy and being nice that it makes Chick-fil-A's culture looks like child's play. Okay, he's not asking you to be nice. This is not be courteous. This is not, be friendly. This is so much bigger than that. The second thing that this is not about people pleasing or being liked. Shout out to all my people pleasers in the house. Anybody? Show of hands if you're a people pleaser. Okay, about 10 of us. The rest of you are liars. Some of you are like, I should have raised my hand. Because now, not only did I not please God, I didn't please Sammy. That's not good. People pleasing will do tricks to you, play tricks on your mind. Like, I want to please him, but I don't know. If it just so happened that you are one of the 10 people in the room, including myself, who are people pleasers, I'm just wondering this morning if you've ever considered that sometimes people pleasing is selfishness masquerading as kindness. Right? I mean, come on now. Have you ever considered how low-key manipulative it really is that, hey, I'm going to do something for you because I know that if I do this for you, it's going to make you think fondly of me. And if you think fondly of me, then I'm going to feel better about myself. Right? I know we don't put it in those words, but that's it. Okay, do you guys mind if I keep it real for just a minute? Is that okay? Like there's real and then there's like real. All right? I had a conversation with my life coach, I don't know, a couple months ago. And I think it's just this whole COVID thing, man. I know it's messed with all of us, but as a pastor, it's been a crazy year, right? It's just nuts. And I think just having people transition and people leave for different reasons, and I found myself second guessing myself so much. And so I'm sitting down with my life coach and we're talking, and I'm like, I don't know what to think. I'm like, you got to help me sort through the clutter because I can't figure out right now what is me pastoring people because I care about people or what is me trying to please people so they don't leave. Right? I find myself in that place, okay, I see that person, and I want to reach out to that person, and I want to do the things that I've been doing for the last 5 years as a pastor to shepherd that person, but then there's a thought in the back of my mind that's like, Sammy, are you doing that simply that they can think you're a good pastor and think fondly of you, and then maybe they won't leave, and that'll make you feel better as a pastor? Right? A lot of times, if we're honest, that people-pleasing tendencies that we have is simply selfishness or self-centeredness masquerading as kindness. Right? This is not really the sermon today, but FYI to all of us in here who have season tickets to the people-pleasing show. If you do this, I'm just throwing this out, and I'm having to learn this with you. If you do what Paul is talking about here, if you choose the way of Jesus, which is saying, I'm going to eat last, and I'm going to put others before me. If you do that, you are pretty much guaranteeing that most people, maybe not most people, a lot of people won't like you. If they hated me, Jesus says, they will hate you too. So no, this is not about being nice, and this is not about being liked, and this is not about being a people pleaser. The one guy who actually pulled this off, a lot of people hated him. It's more than courtesy. It's not people pleasing. It's not about being liked. And last but not least, this is not about letting people walk all over you or about being a victim. In John chapter 10, Jesus is talking to his followers, and he's telling them he's a good shepherd who lays down his life for his flock. And then he says this. He's like, nobody takes my life. I lay it down. What Jesus is saying here is like, hello, just so you know, I'm not a victim. Right? The reason that Jesus lived the way he lived and the reason Jesus died the way he died is not because he was powerless or because he was a victim or because he was insecure. Quite the contrary. Jesus was the most confident being to ever walk the face of the earth. Jesus was the most secure being to ever walk the face of the earth. Jesus was the most powerful being to ever walk the face of the earth. And it was from that power and from that security and from a place of confidence that he was actually able to serve people and give his life for them. So no, it's not like Jesus is like, oh, they walked over me, I don't know what to do. It's not that Jesus couldn't do anything. At a snap of a finger, he could have had the heavenly host just burst through the heaven and just turn the whole thing upside down. But it was from a place of power that he chose to serve. So what are you saying, Sammy? Are you saying that if I'm insecure, I can't do Philippians chapter 2? That's exactly what I'm saying. And I know we don't talk often a lot about this in church, but you show me somebody who's insecure, and I'll show you a man or a woman who's too preoccupied with themselves to actually pull off what Paul's saying here. I don't know if you caught it or not, but the reason Paul put verse 1 before he put verse 2 and 3 and 4 is because you can only do 3 and 4 in response to 1. Right? Again, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, any comfort from his love, any sharing in his spirit, any tenderness, and any compassion. Paul is saying only people who have those things can do what I'm about to say. So it's not about being a victim. It's not about being walked over. No, it's only people who have that kind of security and that kind of confidence can do verse 3. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking only to your interests, but each of you to look to the interests of others. So here's the million-dollar question. If Philippians 2 is not about being nicer people, if it's not about being liked or being a people pleaser, if Philippians chapter 2 is not about letting people walk all over you or being a victim, then what in the world is it? I love it when you guys ask me questions when I preach. It's my favorite. Simply put, this is a revolt. Right? Philippians 2, it's a revolt. Okay, if you're watching online, type in the comments, look at your neighbor, say, it's a revolt. Not it's a revolt, it's I-S-S-A. It's a revolt. It's a revolt. Okay, and I know maybe nobody wants to hear this, but you need to hear this because unless you realize what Paul is saying here, you're going to miss the weight of this passage. Make no mistake about it, fam. Paul is calling for a revolt here, and here's maybe the part that most of us don't see coming, especially if you've been in church your whole life. The revolt that Paul is calling for here is not a revolt against culture or the enemy. The revolt that Paul is calling for here is a revolt against self. In other words, the primary object of today's revolt, of today's challenge, is not a revolt against culture that's going to think you've lost your mind if you live like this. The primary object of our revolt is not against an enemy that's trying to distract you. I know how much us church people love to blame everything on the enemy because that kind of gives us a pass. But just so you know, the revolt that Paul is calling for here is a revolt against yourself. In other words, the hardest part about doing Philippians 2 is not culture that's going to pull you in the other way. It's not even the enemy. The hardest part about doing Philippians chapter 2 is you. The hardest part about doing what Paul is talking about here is that it requires you, are you ready for this, to put to death what the ancient referred to as your flesh. The hardest part about Philippians chapter 2 is that in order to fight for this, you have to fight with yourself. The hardest part about this is that you and I were hardwired at birth to do opposite of everything he's asking us to do. The hardest part about this is that it demands that you and I silence the voice that we've been listening to from the day we were born. Jared, when were you born? 88. What day? Do you know what day? What did you say? 5th of January. Do you know what time? Oh.
Sometime after like 2 a.m. or something.
That's all you got from me? Your mom went through all that? You're like, sometime after 2 a.m. 2:58. Let's go with that.
That's not right.
That's not right. Anybody know what time? I'll pick somebody else. Sarah, what time you got? 6:42 a.m. That's right. What's yours?
I was born January 4th, 1955 at 7 in the evening, and in the Bible, the evening is referred to as day, so I'm an early bird.
There you go. Can we give a hand to Robin, by the way? That's amazing. You're welcome, Robin. We're going to get you a mic the next time. Just for this whole service, just a room mic. I don't know if you've ever thought about this before, but Robin, Sarah, Jared, ever since the day you were born, there's been a voice that's been whispering the same 5 words in your ear every single day. Life is all about you. Every day. Life's all about you. Life's all about you. Life's all about you. Life's all about you. Every day since the 50s, every day since 88, there's a voice that's been telling you that it's all about you. And that, fam, is the hardest part of today's conversation. Right? The hardest part of today's conversation is silencing that voice that's become second nature to most of us. That the hardest part about today's conversation is that it requires us to kill what is arguably the most insatiable desire that resides in everyone in this room and everybody online. Public service announcement in case you missed it. AKA PSA ICYMI. You'll get that in a second. The most insatiable desire in most of us is not the desire for food or sex or alcohol or drugs or social media scrolling. I don't know if you know this or not, but the most insatiable desire in most of us is the desire to be the center of the world. Okay, and I don't want to oversimplify what you walked in here today. But I've been a pastor long enough and I've been a human long enough to know that so much of the addiction and so much of the chains and so much of the burdens and so much of the obsession that not all of it, but so much of it that you and I, a lot of us in here walked in here today can be traced back to an obsession with self. Could it be that so much of what we get ourselves into can be, I know we're not going to say it that way, but it's true, isn't it? That so much of what we carry is because we have this insatiable desire to be the center of the universe. And it shows up a million places in our lives. But perhaps the place that you see it the most is in how we treat other people. There is no greater argument for this insatiable desire to be the center of the world than how we treat people. We talked about this several months ago. If you remember in John chapter 4, James, the brother of Jesus, remember what he said? He said, what causes troubles and quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from desires, the battle within you? You want something and you don't get it, so you kill and you covet. You want your way and you're not getting it. James is like, the reason that you're in a tiff, the reason that you're in an argument, the reason that you're fighting, the reason that you're not happy with them at the end of the day, most of the time, is because you're just not getting your way. There's something inside of you and I that hardwires us to want to be the center of the universe. And Paul's saying, in order for us to do this, then we have to somehow kill that. And it is a lot harder, I think, than most of us are willing to admit. 6 weeks ago, my wife and I, we got in one of those fights where nobody wants to throw up a white flag. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Any married people feel me on that? Where you've been in a fight? Okay. 4 of us. All right. The rest of you guys, maybe we can start a counseling thing, and it can just be the Adabys, the Cants, and the Gratzes, and they can teach us how to have a perfect marriage, okay? I mean, we aren't counseling, so that's helping us, but, the rest of you guys, you got to share your secret with us, So do you guys have a Facebook group we can be a part of? We're not going to contribute because obviously we had issues, but we can eavesdrop and we can learn what it's like to never fight, But we had one of those. And I remember, babe, I don't know if you remember this. We're standing in the kitchen. My wife looks at me, and she's like, you think you're right, and I think I'm right. And I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. And she went this way, and I went that way. And we did the whole awkward thing, where you're fighting with somebody that you live with. Like I heard a comedian say that once. Isn't that weird when you have to pass each other in the hallway? You're trying to kind of like scoot through each other like, hey. And I didn't tell my wife this, so she doesn't know this, but I was so close to tapping in. Right, last night I was scrolling on ESPN, and they had a UFC fight on, and I just caught the last part of it, and this guy literally, he's about to knock the other guy out. Like, the guy's like woozy, and he just like, all he had to do was just like lean on him, and the guy was on the ground, but he didn't realize it, and there was like 5 seconds left on the clock, and he was literally saved by the bell. Right, and he went to his corner, and his trainers were like, man, you had him, bro. Just push him over. He was done. My wife couldn't tell this, but that was me. I was like, just one breath, and I would have been like, I'm out. And the reason is because I had just spent all day reading Philippians chapter 2. And I'm like, oh, God, you set me up. Anybody ever feel like God set you up? Like, I'm in my office for 6 hours reading, agree with each other, love each other. Don't push your way to the front. Don't sweet talk your way to the top. Put yourself aside. Help others get ahead. Don't be obsessed with getting your own advantage. Forget yourself long enough to lend a helping hand. I literally spent like 5-6 hours studying this. Then I get home, and I'm in a fight with my wife. And in the back of my head, the whole time, I was hearing Philippians chapter 2, and I'm like, I don't want to do it. And as I'm fighting with her, I'm fighting myself. You ever been there? I know what is right. I know what I should choose. I know what God's calling me to do, but there's something in me that's holding ground. This insatiable desire in me to be right and to be the center of the universe. It's like Rocky in Rocky 1. He's like, I'm losing, but I'm going to go the distance. And I don't mean to be dramatic, but I remember taking the trash out, and I thought to myself, I'm like, I literally said this out loud in my garage. I'm like, I have no shot at this. Right? I'm like, if I cannot do this for my best friend, who I love more than anyone in the world, who I vowed before God and others to put before, if I can't even kill this desire inside of me, if I can't get myself to say those 3 simple words, then what shot do I have of doing this for a neighbor who has nothing to offer me? What shot do I have of doing this for an enemy? Jesus says, you have heard it said, love your neighbors and hate your enemy. I say, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And I'm like, what? I can't even lay down my pride in this moment for my bride. And what shot do I have of doing this? And Paul is not calling us in Philippians chapter 2 every once in a while, make sure you apologize. No. This is a lifestyle. This is a worldview. Imagine you wake up every morning and this is your framework. You're like, my goal this morning is to do what? Is to not push my way to the front or sweet talk my way to the top. No. I'm going to put myself aside and I'm going to help others get aside. I'm not going to be obsessed with getting my own advantage. I'm going to forget myself long enough to lend a helping hand. Question, what shot do you have of pulling this off as a lifestyle? Answer, none. I know it's not fun when the guy that asks you the question gives you the answer before you get a chance to answer it, but I'm going to do it anyways because I don't need you to waste time on this. The answer is none. Maybe not the kind of sermon you expect to hear at church, but the truth is you and I have no shot of pulling this off on our own. And maybe that's the plot twist in today's conversation that you didn't see coming. The plot twist in this conversation, I hate to break it to those of you who are like Aaron Cant, who your natural instinct is like, yeah, let's grind in and tighten our fists and dig in and let's go get it. Hate to break it to you to be the bearer of bad news, but you can't do that with Philippians chapter 2. You have no shot of doing this in your own strength. You can try. Maybe you do it for an hour or a day or a week, but you will be back to your old self in your own strength. And so no, the response to Philippians chapter 2 is not grind your teeth and dig in and tighten your fists and try as hard as you can to put others before yourselves. Oh, I'm going to try. No, the response to Philippians chapter 2 is throw your hands up in the air and surrender and say, I cannot do this. The response to Philippians chapter 2, if you're being honest, is to just acknowledge to yourself that I am way too selfish, too stubborn, too self-centered, and too insecure to pull this off. And you don't have to say this out loud, but I wonder how many of us in the room are self-aware enough to acknowledge that to ourselves. That, come on now, maybe for a day I could pull it off. Maybe for a week, but let's be honest, I am too selfish, I am too stubborn, I am too self-centered, and for some of us, I am too insecure to actually do what he's saying here. This morning alone, I wonder, thinking about this driving here today, if there was a way that we could take all of your thoughts, what you were thinking this morning, we could put up on the screen. I wonder what we would conclude about you. When you got up this morning, who were you thinking about? When you put your clothes on, you got in your car and you're coming to church, who were you thinking about? When you walked in the room today, were you thinking, man, how's this going to go for me? But I wonder what's going to happen with everybody. Is anybody going to talk to me? Or am I going to talk to somebody? I wonder if I'm going to see my friends. Or I wonder if I can be a friend. Is anybody going to sit by me? Or am I going to sit by some? I wonder how this is affecting them. Or I wonder how it's affecting me. I think if most of us are honest, it's already, I don't know what time it is. It's like 11:30 or 10:30 or whatever it is. I think the reality is, even this morning alone, most of us have spent 90-something% of the day obsessed with ourselves. The person we're thinking about most of the time is us. Even when we walk in a room like this, it's how does all this affect me? No shot of pulling it off. And on top of that, not only are most of us too selfish, too self-centered, too stubborn to do what Paul's asking us to do, but then there's life. Come on now. I know we're all smiling like, hey, the goodness of God. But come on, life, marriage, kids, sickness, job loss, finances, anxiety, depression, fear. There's all of those things that we couldn't control that are a burden on us. So not only are we coming in with natural bent towards being selfish and self-centered, but we got the burdens of life. And Paul's like, hey man, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. In humility, I'm like, shut up, bro. Like, ain't nobody got time for that. There's me and then there's life. I love the way Pastor Louis Giglio put it about the Christian walk. It's one of my favorite quotes in the world. He said, the Christian life isn't hard, it's impossible. There was only one person who was able to pull it off, and they named it after him. That's right, Bishop. The Christian life, what Paul is calling you to do, it's not hard, it's impossible. You cannot pull it off on your own strength. Now, don't miss the point. I'm not saying you don't have a part to play, because you do. And we're going to talk about it next week. And I hope you come back, because it's really good. And Paul masterfully invites us to partake in what God's doing. So the point is not that you don't play a part. What I'm suggesting this morning, and please don't miss this. If you miss anything else I say in the morning, don't miss this. The starting point for living like this is not, all right, let's go get them. No, the starting point for this kind of a lifestyle is surrender. The starting point is acknowledging that I can't do this on my own. The starting point is realizing that you can't fight flesh with flesh. You're going to lose. The starting point is saying, I need to lean on the Spirit of God. I need a little super in my natural to be able to pull this off. The starting point is acknowledging how much you desperately need Jesus. I know a lot of us church people in here know that we needed Jesus to save us, but I'm just wondering how many of you realize that you need Jesus to live the life He saved you into? The gospel that saves you is the same gospel that sustains you. Where did we get off thinking He saved us and now we got it? Thank you, Jesus, for saving me. Now let me go live the Christian life. And Jesus is going, what? You can no more live the Christian life than you can save yourself from death. The starting point is saying, I can't do this. And like not just saying that, but like believing that. Like I'll never forget. I mean, people always ask, like, when did you get saved? And I'm like, I don't know. I grew up in church. I don't know. I can tell you the day I got saved. Right? I mean, I know I went up to the altar many times to make sure that it took, you know. I don't remember the day. But you know what I remember? I'll never forget 20 years ago, I was at Crew on University of Toledo's campus in the Student Union, the Ingman Room. I think it's renamed now. Sitting in the back of the room. There's a worship service. People are singing. And I remember I went to the very back. I can picture I went to the very back of the room. You ever been in a worship service, people are worshiping, and you just got to do your own service? Right? You're like, I got. So I go to the back of the room, and I fall on my knees. And people probably like, wow, he's worshiping. I wasn't worshiping, man. I was mad. I was angry, and I was tired. I was tired, y'all. I was tired of trying so hard. I was tired of coming back to the same place over and over again. I was tired of circling and circling and circling. I was tired of dedicating my life and rededicating my life and rededicating my rededication. I was tired of trying to be a good Christian. And so I finally hit the limit. And I said this. I put my hands in my face because I didn't want anybody to hear me. And I literally screamed. I'm like, I can't do this. Like I said that to him. I'm like, I can't do this. I've been trying for so long to be a good Christian and to do everything you're calling me to do and to be pure and to be a good person and to be kind and Philippians. I can't. I screamed at God. I'm like, I can't do this. And I'm done. And I will never forget, in that moment, I felt like I heard the voice of God say to me. It wasn't an audible voice. You know, sometimes you just can feel it in your spirit. I feel like God said to me, finally, thank you. Now let me live through you. That sounds so churchy, but that was a defining moment in my life and in my friendship with Jesus when I came to the place where I realized I cannot do what God's calling me to do. And He's like, thank you very much. Now let me carry the burden. And I don't know if you've been there lately. I don't know if you've ever been there. If you have not, today is your day. I was praying for you this morning. I don't care how long you've been coming to church. If this is your first time or your 1,000th time. I wonder if for some of you, today is the day. Could today be the day where you have your own defining moment? Where you say, man, I've tried, but I keep circling back. Where you swallow your pride and you say, I am too selfish and too self-centered and too stubborn to do what you're asking me to do. I cannot do this on my own. Maybe today is the day that you give up and you lean in on what God wants to do. I know you come to church for the preacher to tell you not to give up. Today I'm telling you, you need to give up. Right? When you go home, like, what did Pastor talk about today? He told me to give up. Give up trying to do this in your own strength because you can't pull it off. And we're going to talk about the part that we get to play next week. But if it's okay with you guys, I want to just leave us in the tension today. I know how much us church folks love a resolution and we like it. There's no bow to the end of today's conversation. I want you to sit in that tension. I want to give you this morning the gift of feeling inadequate to be the person God's called you to be. I want to give you the gift of knowing that on your own, you are not enough to be who God has called you to be. Hear me out. Okay? Don't miss what I'm not saying. You are more valuable than you could ever imagine. God loves you more than you could ever imagine. Nothing you'll do will ever change how God feels about you. And you can know that because of the cross of Jesus Christ. Having said that, I know this is going to go against popular culture. You're not enough. I know everybody's screaming to you that you're enough. And I think what they're trying to really say is that you're valuable and God loves you and everything I just said. And those things are all true. But if by enough, that means that you have what it takes, I'm here to inform you that you don't. You cannot be who God called you to be on your own. And if you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus Christ, I bet you can't even be who you want to be on your own. And so I'm inviting you today to lean in the tension. There is a peace of mind and a rest that comes only after we've exhausted every option. And the only thing left to do is to throw our hands up in the air and say, I can't. I surrender. And I acknowledge my need for God. It is Christ in us that is the hope of glory. Christ in us. For those of you who are followers of Jesus Christ this morning, I have a simple prayer for you. I want to remind you, your Savior didn't just come to bring you to life. He came to live through you. Paul says, I've been crucified with Christ and I no longer live. It's Christ who lives through me. So here's the prayer for you. Jesus, I need you and I can't do that alone. I'll just give you a few minutes to just pray that. Jesus, I need you. You can close your eyes if you're up for it. If you want to kneel, open your hands, whatever it takes for you to get to that place. To just say, man, I need you. I can't be the kind of husband that I need to be. I can't be the kind of wife you want me to be. I can't be the kind of mom you wanted me to be, the kind of dad you wanted me to be. I can't be the kind of friend, neighbor, worker. I am too focused on myself. I'm too insecure. I'm too stubborn. I'm too selfish. I'm too self-centered to do this on my own. I need you. Just tell them that. I need you and I can't do it on my own. And if you're in the room and you've never said yes to Jesus, I want to invite you this morning to also pray a prayer that we ask people to pray all the time. Jesus, I believe, and I give you my life. Jesus, I believe, and I give you my life. It's not the only conversation you and God need to have, but it's the beginning of what I believe is the greatest adventure in life. Jesus, I need you, and Jesus, I believe.